Okay, everyone, welcome. This is a hybrid event, which you might have picked up on. So we've got people here in person, and we've also got people joining us on Zoom. Thank you, Leanne from Events, who's doing a brilliant job of keeping us going, both virtually and in person. So it's really exciting to have this kind of hybrid event and to be welcoming everybody back to campus. And I'm so happy to be able to hold this event and to see people in 3D. It's terribly exciting. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anne-Marie Evans and I'm the Associate Head of School for English Literature here at York St John. And it's really lovely to see such a mix of people joining us this evening, as I said, in person and online. We've got our current students, we've got colleagues, we've got alumni, members of the public who are all here and part of our York St John English literature community. So thank you all for coming and joining us in person, and thank you and welcome to everybody who is joining us at home. So as I said, Leanne, who as you saw has just left, I want to say a big thank you to Leanne and the events team. It's no small thing to organise this type of hybrid event, so we're hugely grateful to them. And it's my real pleasure to start with an announcement and with a prize awarding, which is a lovely, lovely way to start the evening. Now, some of you might know that we have a yearly prize here for our students, and it's for the first year who achieves the highest marks across their modules. And we award the prize at the beginning of their second year. And this year's winner is Katie Godfrey. Katie isn't here this evening, she's watching online. So hi, Katie, and huge congratulations to you. If she was here, she knows I would bring her over here and make her stand up and receive her book voucher in person. So she's safely at home, but can we please give her a huge, huge clap? So Katie, well done to you, and I hope that you appreciated that clap at home. It's really great, and we're so excited to be able to award that award this year. Now, as I'm sure you know, our motto here at York St John Literature is words matter. This is our philosophy, and it's also our approach to the discipline. After the challenging time that we've all had since the outbreak of COVID, it strikes me that the study of literature and the humanities has never been more important. The act of writing itself is powerful and political and complex. Words hold weight and they wield power, and no one, of course, knew that better than Shakespeare. When we study literature, we learn about the world in nuanced ways, about injustice, about marginalized voices, about those who have been denied different types of freedom. And I know that Saffron is sure to be picking up on some of those ideas this evening. Some of you might not be aware that Saffron was awarded their PhD last year. So I was really pleased to be able to invite them to give this year's Words Matter lecture, not only as a way of hearing about their research, but as a way of celebrating their achievements. So well done again, Dr. Vickers Walkling. And as we were denied a night out because of COVID, because normally the team would have had a night out for anything to celebrate, this is a really lovely opportunity to celebrate as well. So just a few little bits of housekeeping from me then before we get started. If you are watching us at home on Zoom, please feel free to send in a question. You just need to click on the Q&A icon, and you can send your questions in and I'll have a look at them at the end. If again you're watching at home, there is a live transcript, so you can just click on the closed captions button, the CC button, if you want to access that. For those of you here in person, I need to let you know that the fire exits are here. Chicken and fish will be available. No. There is no fire alarm planned this evening, so if it goes off, we are gonna have to exit. So please just be aware of that. Hopefully it won't. Shakespeare wouldn't approve of that. So hopefully that won't be happening. If anybody wants to pop out to the bathroom, all the bathrooms are just slightly further down this corridor. We are recording this as it's a hybrid event, but don't worry, you are not on screen in the audience, you're okay. And we would encourage you to wear masks for this event, as we're encouraging everyone on campus to wear a mask for indoor events. I'm wearing this so you can lip read, and Saffron will be further enough away from you all to not wear a mask for their lecture. Okay, I think that's everything. So I think the last thing to do is just to say, I hope you can all join me in welcoming Saffron. And I think that we're all really, really looking forward to hearing about Hamlet and the legacy of 1989. Over to you, Saffron.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for that wonderful introduction. And, you know, this woman doesn't let you rest on your laurels. I finished my PhD and she said, right, you're doing the Words Matter lecture. I am delighted and honoured to be invited. I'm just going to do a quick hello, mum, hello, kids, hello, friends out there. So thank you all so much for coming. I've also got a nice little card here that my dear friend's just given me, reminding me to breathe. So I will. I might need to stop and breathe every now and again. Right, so let's start. I am going to read just so that I sort of keep on track, but hopefully it will be clear for everybody. So as I've just said, thank you for my introduction, Anne-Marie, and thank you for inviting me to deliver this year's Words Matter lecture. I hope you enjoyed or noticed the clip as we came in. What did it have to do with Shakespeare's Hamlet? You may be asking yourself, but don't worry, all will be revealed. Please feel free to ask me any questions at the end. Now, the annual Words Matter lecture focuses very much, as the title suggests, on the importance of words. And we've got good old Hamlet mug here, available from Redbubble, with words written on it. So it's going to be a little bit unusual tonight, because my research is based on Hamlet in non-Anglophone, that's non-English speaking contexts, and rather than the words written by Shakespeare. Furthermore, my research is informed by performance studies rather than translation studies, and I am primarily looking at the non-verbal languages of theatre, the mise en scène, the sonography, the costuming, the music, the place of performance, and even the moment of production, the time and the cultural, social, or political situation to which it speaks. Hamlet is, according to UNESCO, the most famous and most translated play in the world. We may never have seen or read Hamlet, but most of us will have heard of it, and probably recognise any figure of a man and occasionally a woman with a skull as its protagonist. Although briefly challenged by absurdist interpretations of King Lear in post-Holocaust Europe, Hamlet appears to have regained its position in the late 20th and early 21st century as the text that is most systematically called upon to define the modern condition, with its mirror angled to reflect the schismatic splintering and reconfiguring of new world orders. Its performances and screen adaptations have further added to its global dissemination. Olivier here, in his 1948 film, influenced this production in China, for example. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's important to remember that in Olivier's film, he said that Hamlet was essentially about a man who thought too much and couldn't make up his mind. But how did this interest in global Hamlet start for me? Well, in early 1995, whilst on vacation from teaching English in mainland China, I found myself sitting in the Tokyo Globe Theatre as the Beijing People's Art Theatre performed a modern dress Mandarin Chinese appropriation of Hamlet. They were reviving a production that they had put on just over 5 years earlier at the end of 1989, the beginning of 1990. It had originally been performed in Beijing by the Linjiahua Theatre Studio in what had been the first ever performance of any play in the Communist People's Republic by an independent, privately owned theatre company. The government's performance restrictions, however, meant that the play and the players could only tour outside of the country to Japan under the auspices of a state-run theatre. As I came out of the auditorium, I asked myself, why did they choose Hamlet? How was it that the tale of a semi-mythical Norse prince from early medieval Europe came through the prism of Shakespeare's play and its 16th century anxieties to be representative of the form and pressure of urban Chinese experience in the late 1980s and the early 1990s? In this lecture, I'm going to introduce 3 productions of Hamlet, all experimental, even iconoclastic in their handling of the play, and I will ask to what extent did their directors appropriate Shakespeare to speak to a seismic moment in history, 1989. They are, here, Lin Zhaohua's spoken theatre production of Hamlet from late communist China. This modern dress production was first put on, as I've just suggested, in the immediate aftermath of the 1989 Tiananmen Square student protests, and at the height of China's open door policy, which started the transformation of the nation into a major global economy. Punk director and DJ Youngclutter's production of H from post-communist Poland was performed in promenade to an indie rock soundtrack in the derelict buildings of the Gdańsk shipyards. It was from these shipyards in the 1980s that the Solidarity trade union movement had challenged the socialist regime, and in 1989 had supported the winning candidates in the first semi-free elections in the Soviet bloc. And last but not least, here we have Sulayman al-Bassam and his pan-Arab production of the Al-Hamlet summit, reflecting on the perceived shift towards a politicized Islam after 1989 as a response in the Middle East to failed socialism, Western interventionism, and conflict. But hang on a moment, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I mean, what even happens in Hamlet anyway? Let's have a quick review, as it may have been years since we last read or saw Hamlet, or we may not yet have made time in our lives to have sat down with it at all. After all, it is Shakespeare's longest play, running to several hours if performed in its entirety. So I'm going to give you a little précis thanks to the cartoon panels of Mayor Lishan Gosling. You can easily find these on the internet. They're very funny and always on point. Hamlet in 3 panels. The ghost of Hamlet's father tells Hamlet to revenge him. Hamlet talks a lot about avenging his father. So that's basically nearly the entire play. We're talking 4 or 5 hours of talking about avenging his father. And then eventually in the last few minutes, Hamlet revenges his father. And actually it's all a little bit of a disaster, but never mind, he got there in the end. Okay, so that is Hamlet, that most haunted of Western dramas we've put up there. Okay, let's move over. So, as you can see in this summary, the ghost of old King Hamlet features prominently. He sets up the action. However, when Marvin Carlson says in his book, The Haunted Stage, the Theatre as Memory Machine, when he says that that Hamlet is, I'm flopping my nose here, let's take a glass of water. There we go. Start that sentence again. Okay, however, when Marvin Carlson says in his book, The Haunted Stage, the Theatre as Memory Machine, that Hamlet is the most haunted of all Western dramas, he doesn't just mean because the play has a ghost in it. Carlson argues that the physical theatre is among the most haunted of human structures. So text, stage, and even the bodies of actors are intentionally or unintentionally possessed by the readings, stagings, and enactments that have gone before. The three directors I look at tonight consciously draw on both global and local Hamlet traditions. Zhaohu talks of the influence of Olivier's film, as we saw earlier, a film which, as I suggested, posits that Hamlet is the story of a man that thinks too much, of a man that overthinks. However, he also draws on elements of traditional Chinese theatre in a way that seems to a Western eye to be Brechtian. Lin's ghost communicates via loudspeaker, just as the Chinese government still communicated daily news and instructions to its citizens via speakers in the streets in the early 1990s. And I said I wasn't going to digress, but I am. So when I lived in China in the 1990s, I'd get woken up every morning at about 6 a.m. by this loudspeaker coming on the campus, telling all of us, students and staff, that we needed to get up and we needed to go and exercise and that we needed to be good citizens. Because I was a foreign teacher, I was allowed to ignore the call to communal exercise. However, we were then sort of entertained with the sort of the strains. I think it was Richard Clayderman playing piano, who was massive in the 1990s in China, at which point you just had to get up. Okay, that was my aside. Let's get back onto the serious stuff. Okay, so that's China, where the ghost is speaking through a loudspeaker, and that's very resonant for Chinese audiences. Klata, Youngclutter, follows in the footsteps of Stanislaw Wyspiański, the father of Polish theatre, who wrote a reflection on the play of Hamlet that saw the ghost of Hamlet's father walk the battlements, not of Elsinore, but of the royal castle in Krakow. And this was at a time in history in the 19th century when Poland had been partitioned out of existence. So Poland didn't exist in the 19th century, and its monarchy was no more. Youngclutter also, however, draws on more recent shared cultural memories of popular music, from Bowie's Heroes to the White Stripes' Seven Nation Army. So yes, before there was Jeremy Corbyn, there was Hamlet. Bassam overlays a contemporary story of an Arab dictatorship crumbling in the face of insurgency and Western interference, which owes as much to East German Heiner Muller's postmodern Hamlet machine as he does to Shakespeare's play. There is no ghost in this play, unless you want to think about maybe the 1990 invasion of Kuwait as a ghost. That's a possible reading of it. But there is a British arms dealer who plays everyone off against each other and, of course, profits from their revenges. These three directors are interested, therefore, in the other types of ghosts, the ghosts of a nation and the ghosts of collective memory. So my first sort of big question, or your big question, as I'm waffling on here, might be, yes, but why Hamlet? As Margrethe de Gracia sums up in her book, Hamlet Without Hamlet, no work in the English canon has been so closely identified with the beginning of the modern age as Hamlet. The basis of the identification now is so obvious that it need hardly be stated. By speaking his thoughts in soliloquy, by reflecting on his own penchant for thought, by giving others cause to worry about what he is thinking, Hamlet draws attention to what is putatively going on inside of him. Furthermore, you don't have to be studying English literature to have come across Hamlet. Hamlet, both the character and the play, has been picked up and drawn upon by intellectuals across time and place, philosophers, psychoanalysts, political thinkers. Hamlet influenced the works of Hegel in the Enlightenment and Coleridge in the Romantic Age, both focusing on ideas of interiority, the beautiful indrawn soul. Freud develops his ideas about the Oedipus complex from his analysis of Hamlet's relationship with his mum, Gertrude. And even Karl Marx opened his copy of Hamlet and borrowed the image of the old ghost mole as the spirit of revolution. And speaking of spirits of revolution, here's the big second question. Why 1989? Well, for my generation, so that's for a few of us in the audience, 1989 means one thing. It's the year that changed the world. If I think of 1989, I think not of Taylor Swift's studio album, but of certain key events around the fall of communism, in particular, the visual symbolic act of the coming down of the Berlin Wall, and also a shift in the Western gaze from the communist East to the Middle East. This is, of course, an oversimplification of very complex events. Yet even before the end of the year, Francis Fukuyama had speculated that with 1989 came the end of history. Whether or not history did end in 1989 is a discussion that lies outside of this presentation. Although neo-capitalism is alive and well, any hopes of a democratic utopian future for the world were short-lived. It is perhaps European concepts of post-histoire emerging from or into the reconfiguring world that may be more useful to turn to in order to understand the moments of production out of which these three Hamlets were reimagined. So in 1992, if you've lost me, if I've lost you, the French cultural theorist Jean Baudrillard contended that we shall not be spared the worst. That is, history will not come to an end, since the leftovers, the church, communism, ethnic groups, conflicts, ideologies are indefinitely recyclable. But what does Hamlet have to do with politics, some of you may ask? In post-Enlightenment British and American interpretation, Hamlet is usually presented to be more about individual consciousness than about society at large. Fortinbras, that's Fortinbras there from Maya Gosling, Prince of Norway, martial and decisive, it says. Fortinbras, the king of Norway's vengeful son and foil to the dithering Prince of the Danes, as Maya Gosling rightly points out, is often cut entirely in many Western productions of Hamlet. It's 4 hours long, remember. This, however, shifts the play's emphasis away from regime change, usurpation, and annexation towards the personal or the individual tragedy that we are familiar with. In Eastern Europe, it is a different matter, however. In his 1993 edited collection, Foreign Shakespeare, Dennis Kennedy summed up a recurring trend I've lost my line now, bear with me one moment. In Eastern Europe, it was a different matter. In his 1993 edited collection, Foreign Shakespeare, Dennis Kennedy summed up a recurring trend in Soviet bloc reconfigurations of Shakespeare. In what has now become a truism of Eastern European Shakespeare scholarship, he claimed that if new plays and films critical of a repressive regime are regularly censored, producers are sometimes tempted to make the classics into coded messages about the present. Shakespeare thus became a secret agent under deep cover. Shakespeare, 007. Okay, so to remind ourselves of where we're going and to tie my three case studies together, okay, we've got Zhaohu putting on Hamlet in 1990s Beijing. We have Youngclutter doing his post-punk appropriation of H in 2004 in Poland, and Sulayman Bassam doing his Al-Hamlet summit again early in the new millennium, set in a non-specific Arab nation. So we have 3 directors, 3 ghosts of 1989, and 3 productions. And 3 images here that will perhaps prompt memory or create memory for you. So firstly, we have the Tank Man at Tiananmen in 1989. We have here a rather fabulous poster that was used as part of the Solidarity election campaign, calling people to vote on the 4th of June, 1989. And also we have images here from the Rushdie affair of the book burnings in Bradford, also earlier on in 1989. So, on exactly the same date in 1989, on different sides of the world, the Polish People's Republic and the People's Republic of China each faced events that would profoundly change the course of their histories. On the 4th of June 1989 in Beijing, the military moved in and brought the student pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square to an abrupt and fatal end. However, on the very same day, Poland held the first semi-free elections of any country in the Eastern Bloc, paving the way for full democratic elections a year later. And as I've just suggested, in Klata's H, the High Noon Solidarity poster here, which called on the people to vote, in his production, this poster could be seen to hang in tatters behind Hamlet after the death of Ophelia. In the 3 decades that have followed 1989 for both Poland and China, both of those countries have seen unimagined social change. They have enjoyed the benefits and experienced the casualties of economic liberalizations, and they have grappled with competing conservative and liberal ideologies. Meanwhile, earlier in 1989, here in the UK, emotions ran high over the publication of a book that was seen by some to be blasphemous. That was Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses. And as Keenan Malik noted, by the first decade of the new millennium, and I'm quoting Keenan Malik here, the issues raised by the Rushdie affair, the nature of Islam, its relationship to the West, the meaning of multiculturalism, the limits of tolerance in a liberal society, would become some of the defining problems of the age, linking the burning of books in Bradford to the burning towers in Manhattan on 9/11. And that is from Malik's book, From Fatwa to Jihad, the Rushdie Affair and its Legacy. So, each director has spoken very clearly about why Hamlet in particular spoke to them and became the vehicle by which they chose to speak their truth in complex circumstances to their specific moments in history. So, martial law had only just been lifted when the Lin Zhaohu Theatre Studio invited the audiences through their doors in Beijing to see their production of Hamlet. The director Lin has always distanced himself from political statements, insisting that his vision is personal. As he has said in an interview with Professor Li Ruwu at the University of Leeds, "I was always hoping to put Hamlet on the stage. I liked the loneliness of Hamlet. Moreover, after 1989, people lost their vitality completely. Everybody now wanted to make money or to win prizes or lottery. Only those who can think feel lonely." Klata, who staged his production in 2004, which was the year that Poland joined the EU, said that he had chosen the Gdańsk shipyard as a venue for his production because it was, to quote Klata, a very accusing space in the heart of the city, end of quotation. The shipyards were all but closed, the skilled workers no longer needed, and in the view of Klata, the hopes for a new, open and liberal Poland had been replaced with commercialism and religious conservatism. The dockyards were a place where all that remained were, and again to quote Klata here, all that remained were the ghosts of our heroes, the unemployed ghosts of our heroes, of the Solidarity movement. Now, whereas Lin's Hamlet is opaque and Klata's H is a challenging mix of political, historical, cultural, and pop culture references, Bassam's intentions in the Al-Hamlet summit are crystal clear. As he states, the text is a cross-cultural piece of writing in which I have tried to capture a sense of the geographical context and contemporary resonance. When first performed in English in 2002, he continues, it aimed to allow English-speaking audiences a richer understanding of the Arab world and its people, and how their fates are inextricably linked to that of the West's. End of quotation. So, Bassam, by engaging with these contexts through the recognizable lens of Hamlet, brings his Western audiences closer to his material. If they already feel an affinity for Hamlet or Ophelia, they may feel an affinity and understand their actions in his play, where Hamlet becomes an Islamist insurgent and Ophelia becomes a suicide bomber. And so, to finish, for the final part of this lecture, I would like to share with you 3 examples of how these directors took the germ of an idea from Hamlet and used it to convey larger ideas about society to their audiences. Let's start with Lin Zhaohu and his Sonography. So Lin had draped the entire stage space for his production in grey sacking. Li Ruru suggests that this was to reflect his own sense of self-doubt in that particular historical moment in China. This scenographic detail came from the line in Shakespeare's play, thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied or with the pale cast of thought. The translation of this phrase is rendered into Chinese as the brilliance of resolution is overcast by a grey layer of thought or a grey coloured thought. And so, of course, you can see the grey scenery is highlighting that for the Chinese-speaking audience. Now, I think it is important to say that Lin has never spoken of this interpretation himself, and he is on record as implying that sometimes people tend to over-interpret his work. And certainly for commentators outside of China, I think there is perhaps a tendency, and it can be a slightly lazy tendency, to always try to read everything through the lens of contemporary Chinese politics. Nonetheless, the grey sacking can be seen to indicate one of the defining metaphors of the production, encapsulating the paradoxical mood of a generation of intellectuals and artists such as Lin, who were both liberated and stunted by the transforming economy that encouraged the people to privilege consumerism over political ideology, or more importantly, for Lin to privilege consumerism over personal integrity. Now, as I said, I saw this production in revival early in 1995, which was 2 years before the death of Deng Xiaoping. And Deng was one of the last of the founding fathers of the People's Republic of China and of Chinese-style communism. His death signaled the end of an era of radical social and cultural transformation, at times a lived theatre of the absurd, in which actually both himself and his family became victims in the Cultural Revolution. But his final years, as well as the events that we referred to earlier that he is most well known for here in the West, he is also responsible for heralding the birth of a globally reawakening China. And in fact, I think his open door policy, according to the World Bank, led to the largest lifting out of poverty in history, or in recent history. That awakening, however, happened in part not only because of politicians like Deng, but also, I would argue, because of artists and intellectuals like Lin Zhaohu. It's got terribly serious in here. We need a little bit of those cartoons again, don't we? It's because I'm reading, but if I wasn't reading, as my students will tell you, I'd be going, oh, and here's a picture. Here's a picture of somebody doing Hamlet. Okay, so let's carry on. So let's look at Youngclutter now. Youngclutter stated that, and my notes say read slide first, so I will. So Youngclutter stated that when in the early 17th century, Shakespeare wrote Something is Rotten in the State of Denmark, he had his country, England, and not Denmark on his mind. So when I am reading it, this is Youngclutter speaking, not me. When I am reading it, I also think of my country, Poland. I was wondering where to locate Elsinore. It matters a lot what space you put it in. Now, Yerzy Limon, who was the late and much beloved Gdańsk-based professor of English literature, the managing director of the Gdańsk Shakespeare Theatre, and artistic director of the Gdańsk Shakespeare Festival, and I know I might have some fellow at Global Shakespeare's people out there who can just take a moment to remember this extraordinary man. He read Klata's presentation of the court of Elsinore as the state of the new Poland, presenting an artistic analysis of the rapid and often uncontrolled, this is Limon speaking here, an artistic analysis of the rapid and often uncontrolled transformation from totalitarianism to democracy, one economy into another. End of quotation. For Limon, this production of H was not simply a clever commentary on current affairs, but a production that spoke deeply to the way liberal Polish intellectuals felt betrayed by the promise of the solidarity movement. And again, I'm going to quote Yerzy Limon here. The word solidarity, he says, has been deeply devalued through political infighting and a dichotomous division among the members of Solidarity post-1989, as many key figures reconfigured as members of parliament. The dichotomy he refers to is the redivision into factions of the diverse groups that had come together for the Solidarity fight as the country transitioned to democracy. Ultimately, the various groups and figures planned very different paths for the new society they wanted to build. These groups included, on the one hand, middle class and sometimes secular intellectuals, such as the members of CORE, which were the Workers' Defence Committee. And in fact, Klata's production loosely uses a 1990 translation of Hamlet by Stanisław Baranczak, who was a founding member of CORE and who, after martial law was introduced in 1981, I think, went into exile in the United States. On the other hand, there were also the deeply religious and socially conservative workers, such as Lech Walesa, who was very much the face of Solidarity and went on to be a president of Poland. But then again, there was a new breed of nationalist right-wing traditionalists who would go on to set up today's Law and Justice Party. So if anybody follows LGBT news or women's rights news in Poland, you will have heard of this party and that sort of culture war that is going on there. And I think it's really important to say at this point that the liberal, ultra-liberal director, Youngclutter, is actually a practicing Catholic and rejects the conservative Catholicism that is being put forward in his name. But what's really interesting here is when I started my research, he was like the amazing person of Polish theatre, and he was given, like, you know, the artistic directorship of the Starry Theatre in Krakow, and it was like, wow, look how cool and sexy and exciting Polish theatre is. Well, I think it was maybe 2017. It was 3 or 4 years ago. Ministers from the Law and Justice Party went on to block Youngclutter's continuation as artistic director at this prestigious Starry Theatre in Krakow, and their reason, they claimed, was because he desecrated the classics. Censorship by the back door, maybe by the front door. I referred earlier, I think, to an Egyptian musical version of Hamlet. Yeah, did I miss out that line? Did I tell you about the Egyptian musical version of Hamlet? I think I missed an entire page. Okay, what I was going to say, oh my, I need this to tell you, oh, we've got to go back here. When was I talking about musical? I'm just getting you all excited for nothing because I don't actually tell you anything about it. Yeah. Somewhere in my presentation, it doesn't really matter where, I am going to say, let's get a picture of that picture up there. I'm going to say that as these directors draw on their different traditions, they're drawing on traditions of political theatre. So in China, in the do you know what I'm thinking? Yeah, in China, in the Second World War, there's a production of Hamlet, which sort of presents Hamlet as a Confucian hero whose role it is to to stand up against corruption as part of his Confucian duty to do the best for his country. And in Poland, there's very much this sense that that Hamlet is the way that intellectuals deal with Hamlet is the way that they engage with their personal and intellectual freedom. So these are really, really important texts. And then I had a line that in the 19th century in Cairo, there was a musical theatre version of Hamlet that wasn't going to progress my argument anyway forward, and I skipped forward. So let's jump ahead now that I'm back. See, even with my notes, I managed to lose the plot. My. Okay, so it woke you all up though, didn't it? So as I said, I have now just referred earlier to the Egyptian musical version of Hamlet, and I was being a little bit flippant there, because of course this didn't give the whole story of the importance of Hamlet in the Arab world. Not only do many Arab theatre cultures have a tradition of political theatre, but offstage, in public discourse, Hamlet has often been used to refer to the need for political action or to critique political inaction. Margaret Litvin has noticed that because Arabic doesn't have an infinitive, to be or not to be, is usually translated, certainly in the press, certainly off stage, as shall we be or shall we not be? And as in the Chinese interpretation, it is seen as a call to have responsibility for the state of the nation. Sulayman al-Bassam relocated from the UK to Kuwait after the events of 9/11 because he implied he felt his voice would have more impact if it came out of the Middle East. His production, as we saw earlier, overtly engaged with the issues of its time. As al-Bassam has said in the Al-Hamlet summit, visually, we are solidly located in the 21st century political universe. We have live feeds and projection screens constantly reminding us of last night's television address by George W. Bush, or last week's summit in Bonn or Washington. It seems like ancient history now, doesn't it? The way the world is moving on. This arrangement allows Shakespeare's words to take on an uncanny metaphorical resonance. And then just to bring it all together in my final slide and to bring it back to Shakespeare. Hamlet, that most meta-theatrical of plays, has as its center the play within a play, through which Hamlet intends to catch the conscience of the king. When Hamlet greets the group of itinerant players who arrive at Elsinore, he sets out his theory of plays and playing. The purpose of playing, says Hamlet, is to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of time his form and pleasure. By appropriating for his personal and political allegory a work already known, well known, and already in repertoire, Hamlet is playing the same game as his creative descendants will 400 years later, when theatre makers use Hamlet to speak to their specific moment in history. So in the play of Hamlet, the play that they use is The Murder of Gonzago. And Hamlet says this is extant and rich in choice Italian, although the court hears it in contemporary Danish version, and Shakespeare's audience, of course, is hearing it in English. The play, which has been renamed The Mousetrap, if only in a barbed jibe, has an interpolated speech written by Hamlet, and it's actually performed twice, first of all in dumb show. It's anachronistic, transformed in plot, theme, language and form, and it crosses cultures and time. And thus the play within the play in Hamlet offers an early modern precedent for the ways in which practitioners and audiences produce and receive global Shakespeare today. Sulayman al-Bassam often performs in situations where there is high censorship and where artists are vulnerable. He is perhaps a little less vulnerable than some of the other directors, as he's speaking very clearly and openly about it. But as we have seen in the case of Youngclutter, history can suddenly change and suddenly you can find yourself on the wrong side of it, but it's not your fault. Sulayman Bassam, as I said, has spoken openly of how he can use Shakespeare as a way to circumvent censorship of politically challenging material. Hence the utility of our friend William Shakespeare, you know, he says. It's William Shakespeare who's saying this, not us. So, furthermore, I would just like to end by saying that because of its place in constructions of modernity, as we have seen in this presentation, Hamlet is uniquely placed to act as a mirror up to nature, particularly in relation to societies in flux at times of geopolitical change. Now, if you're interested in watching any of those productions, you can watch them all for free online. On the MIT Global Shakespeare's website, you can watch Lin Jiahua's Hamlet. Unfortunately, this has no subtitles. It's in Mandarin Chinese. So I'm not sure, you know, if you how much you can follow it if you don't speak Chinese, but you can watch H with English subtitles on the Nineteka website, and you can watch the Al-Hamlet Summit again with English subtitles on the Global Shakespeare's website. And I have some blog posts about particularly about the Al-Hamlet Summit, and maybe a couple on Lin Zhaohu on my Shakespeare Travels blog. Thank you very much for listening to this. Now, I hope, you know, when you use Google Translate, I really hope I've not put anything rude up there. I can vaguely read the Chinese and the Polish, but thank you for coming along. Thank you for sitting in this heat. Thank you for listening to me read a load of really sort of complex stuff about global Shakespeare and Hamlet. Yes, thank you all for supporting me tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Saffron. What an absolutely fascinating lecture. And I do feel also we have to just take a moment. I know I've just blanked the screen, but that was perhaps the most brilliant academic photo of Saffron with a skull. And I don't know why that's not your staff photo, to be quite honest. Absolutely brilliant. So let's just take a moment to appreciate that. But no, thank you so much, Saffron. That was absolutely fascinating. And, you know, I've seen Hamlet on stage about 5 times, and I was kind of thinking, I don't need to see it again. I'm kind of done. I'm all Hamleted out. But now I'm thinking, maybe I do need to watch it again and enjoy it again. So thank you to Saffron. We have a little bit of time for questions now. So if you are watching us from home on Zoom, you can pop a question in the Q&A box and we can hand them on to Saffron. But for now, we can open this up to the floor. So does anybody here have a question that they would like to ask Saffron? And as ever, there are no silly questions. Yes.
Right. I would like to know anything more about the musical version, because the mental image currently is beautiful.
Okay, so let me just repeat that for anyone on Zoom who might not have heard. This is a question, a plea really, for more details on the, was it Egyptian musical version of Hamlet, which we all would quite like to watch now. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, please, Saffron?
Okay, so this is a little bit outside of my area because I think it's not political Shakespeare, but Margaret Litbin.
Saffron, I'm sorry, can I interrupt and ask you to come and stand near the microphone?
Yes, okay. So Margaret Litbin has written this absolutely fantastic book called I think it's Hamlet's Arab Journey. And there's also a blogspot called, I think, Arab Shakespeare or Shakespeare in the Arab World that has loads of really interesting stuff on it. Basically, when she was doing her research, she discovered that, you know, this idea that we have that people take Shakespeare's text and you know, sits down and worship it and translates it where that this is actually sort of a load of rubbish. And in lots of places, that's not how culture, popular culture, high culture. It's not just not how culture travels. So she talks about how in the 19th century, when Shakespeare goes to countries such as Egypt, which were French colonies, they tend to come through French versions. French didn't really like Shakespeare, they were always changing the ending, etc., etc. And it's not necessarily seen as high culture. So this was a sort of romantic musical version. It was written as a star vehicle for the leading actor of the time, I think. If that sounds a bit far-fetched, we only have to look at Ophelia on Netflix, which, although it has a slight sort of feminist bent, is basically another sort of romantic, small romantic response to the text. So yeah, I'd love to have seen it. I don't have a record of it because it was in the 19th century, but hey, yeah, thank you for your question.
Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to take one from Zoom and then we'll come back to folks in the audience. So hold on to your question. We've got one here about, can other Shakespeare plays lend themselves to being used in this way? Could the fashion for using Hamlet change? That's a really interesting one in terms of that idea of Shakespeare as a secret agent. I'm sure we were all kind of really struck by that image. Any thoughts on other plays that could be read
Absolutely,
like this?
absolutely. I think, in fact, I know this person. He was like we stood next to each other for many a production in the Globe to Globe World Shakespeare Festival. Absolutely, yes. I mean, we see King Lear, but we also see comedies being used in this way. I think when I started my research, I thought, oh, I'm going to do King Lear because I really like the play King Lear. But for the purpose of what I wanted to do, I found the play that was most systematically being used for this type of politics that I was looking at, it was Hamlet. And it, you know, as UNESCO said, it's the most famous play, the most translated. But absolutely, I do think those fashions can change after the Second World War and after the horrors of the Holocaust. King Lear, I think, for quite some time became the play that people were looking to. So yeah, it's absolutely, it's not only Hamlet, but for the type of theatre I was looking at, Duncan, yeah, it was, Hamlet kept recurring. So I ended up having to do Hamlet, even though Hamlet was my least favourite play. But now I love Hamlet. Thank you, Lean, Klata, and Sulayman Al-Bassam.
I feel like this is like PhD Stockholm syndrome has happened. You've been like brought into the Hamlet fan club against your will. Thank you. Okay, so I can see some more hands. Yes, over here.
Hi, having seen all the various productions of Hamlet that you have, are you comfortable with it as a vehicle for subversion rather than, do you think it's lost some of its original essence, or is that retained and reinterpreted?
Okay, that's a really interesting question.
Very,
Let me
very
just
good
try and
question.
repeat that for everyone at home. So it was about, after having watched all of the productions of Hamlet that Saffron has, do you still feel that it can still be used as a kind of tool for subversion? I think you were saying, rather than its original essence. Did I?
Do you think it's kind of rendered more shallow by being just a tool for subversion, or does it retain some of its original complexities and original essence of philosophical meaning and the universal meaning that it has, or does it degrade that a bit?
Okay, I'm not going to repeat all of that. No, but it was a beautiful gloss that you added to the question, but okay, go on.
Well, I think firstly, I think in global Shakespeare studies, one of the very first things you learn when you start doing this research is what is original, what is original text, and you start questioning that. You certainly start realizing that universality sort of isn't actually a thing. And there's a fantastic, if anyone's interested in this, I'm sure you'll be interested, there's a fantastic article, I'm going a little bit off topic here, but there's a fantastic article, I think it's available on the National Geographic website, and it's called Shakespeare in the Bush. And Laura Bohannon, who was an American anthropologist, went off to stay with the Tiv people in West Africa. And because she was a woman, but because she was a foreigner, an outsider, they let her be an honorary man and invited her to come in to tell stories with the elders. And she tells this story of how she chooses to take as her archetypal story Hamlet. And so she'll start explaining Hamlet and what it means, because she thinks it's a universal story. It's going to mean the same to everybody. And while she's telling this story, the elders start challenging her and questioning her. And when she talks about the ghost, she says, there's no such things as ghosts. Ghosts don't exist, blah, 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 blah. And she realizes through this dialogue that actually there isn't a universal way of seeing things. And she uses that as an example, as an anthropologist, of how she needed to learn to see the world differently. So I think that for me, I think actually you can see Hamlet a few times, and it stops being wonderful and original, and you suddenly think, oh, this is so long. Will the man ever shut up? Occasionally now it's will the woman ever shut up? And that is actually what I think loses it for us. That initial response we have to it can get deadened. And so for me, looking at these productions was what brought it alive for me again. But to be specific to what you were saying and to these productions can only exist, I think, in the way that they did in their moment of production. Lin Zhaohua's play could be revived. It was revived in 95, was revived again in 2008. But in 2008, even though the costumes were the same, even though the lead actor was the same, it didn't have the same meaning for the audience, because the audience were young people in China who hadn't lived through the things that original audience had lived through. Youngclutter, when I went to see his second Hamlet, which the image of the man in the red coat was from earlier, and that's the bit why I got distracted and didn't tell you about dancing, singing Hamlets. He says, lots of people asking him about H, because it was in Gdansk and the Q&A was in Gdansk. And he says, can we stop talking about this? But he said it nicely. He said, can you stop talking about this, please? Because that place doesn't exist any longer. That place has been developed. It's like a Docklands redeveloped area now. So that history is over. So that play can never be reconstructed. It is film, but it can never be reconstructed. So I think that, I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think that for me, these plays, just as Shakespeare was taking this old play, it wasn't his story, it was somebody else's story, the way he reworked it for his times, his audiences, and made it fresh and new and alive again, that's what these directors are doing.
Okay, thank you. That was a really interesting question. Other questions from the floor? Yes, at the back.
After seeing so many productions of Hamlet, which one's your personal favourite?
Oh, that's a good question. So that was for people at home, that was the question about, after having seen so many productions of Hamlet, which one is Saffron's personal favourite? I'm excited to hear the answer to this, because we actually saw a Hamlet together, didn't we? We took a group of students to see the Cumberbatch.
We did,
on screen.
To see the
Cumberbatch.
To
see the Cumberbatch.
I'm going to lose friends here, but that was not my favourite production of Hamlet.
No, it wasn't.
I think I'm going to see Chris Jumbo as Hamlet in a couple of weeks, which I'm terribly excited about. I was listening to on the radio yesterday about that. I think for me, my favourite production, I won't say any of these three because I studied them for 11 years, although I do love them dearly. But I went to see in Gdansk the Youngclutter, his second production of Hamlet, which was called Hamlet, which was a production which he did with a German company. It was hilarious. It was brilliant. It was in your face, some people stormed out of the audience. Hamlet was sort of like this spoiled young rich guy. York Skull was, the diamond studded, what's his name? Famous artist. Yes, exactly. They had sort of studded skull. And it was completely brilliant production. The play within the play, they ended up just all smearing each other with what looked like excrement and getting up these giant phalluses. So if you know anything about like various theatre, political theatre, that will mean something to you. But for anybody else going, what is going on? And then Claudius comes in and asks for lights, and and then he's got the audience on his side, because half the audience are going like, please stop this monstrosity of experimental theatre. I love that production. reconstruction. And the best thing about seeing that was that it was opening the Gdansk Shakespeare Theatre, which is a reconstructed Shakespeare theatre in Gdansk on a 17th century site. But unlike our sort of, thatch and oldie-woldy globe in London, it's all sort of, I don't know, black and white marble. It's all very postmodern. At the end of it, the roof opened to the stars, and we started clapping, and then everybody stopped clapping because you were just so amazed at this roof opening. And then you realized you weren't clapping and felt terrible because these actors had just done this amazing performance, and you looked and sort of clapping again, but all the actors were just like, wow, this is amazing too. So that would be my favorite. Yeah, so that is Youngclutter's, and you can find clips of that on YouTube.
That sounds amazing. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And another really good question. Any other questions? Yes, over there.
Obviously, like 1989 was like a big political things that inspired kind of like Shakespeare adaptations. Do you think that there's any stuff that's like fueling Shakespeare, political Shakespeare now? And are there any like specific plays that you think people are latching onto to like do that?
That's another great question.
Really
yeah,
question.
So that's a question about 1989 and how it was a kind of a great year for inspiring political Shakespeare, and if there's any contemporary equivalents that are kind of inspiring productions now.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I don't want to say that one of my chapters is tenuous, but of course, obviously, even with the Sulayman Bassam chapter, the dates that is linking to, yes, it starts, so there are links back to 1989 and 1990, but actually a lot of it is speaking to the events of 9/11, for example. So I think, yeah, so I think that is a very obvious date. But then, of course, in different countries, each countries have their own specific events which are going on. So again, thinking of political Shakespeare, back in 2012, if anyone again has been following the news, the Belarus Free Theatre did a production of King Lear that was very much sort of critiquing what is perhaps seen as the dictatorship that is there at the moment. The Georgian production seemed completely apolitical, that's Georgia as in Eastern Europe, Georgia, but at the end, somebody pushed through the audience. Again, I was standing next to Duncan who asked that question, and they sort of propelled this small child onto the stage in full national Georgian costume, who just, I mean, literally was that big and just stood there. So that seemed to be quite a political moment. And I think, yeah, I think if you look on the MIT website, you will see so many plays are used and reused in different ways. Sulayman Bassam has done versions of Twelfth Night. Richard III, his Richard III is very much references the Iraq War, for example. So yeah, these plays are gone to over and over. But I would say that Youngclutter, he also deals with Polish classics, and so does Lin Zhaohu. They also frequently use their own classics as well. That's another question here.
Thank you. Let's have a look. This is a request for the screen, the links to the online productions, which I'm sure we can send out if you want to email our events team or email Saffron. I'm sure we can arrange that for anyone who wants to get hold of those. So
I'll get that information out to Leanne and she can forward it on. And of course, anyone who's on the MA, you're going to be looking at the Al-Hamlet Summit on the MA coming up. So
okay, we've maybe got time for one final question if anybody's got a hand up. Yeah.
Do you feel that the Shakespearean plays are timeless?
So that final, what a good question to end on. Yeah. Do you think that Shakespearean plays are timeless?
I think I'm going to say no. I think I'm going to say sort of the opposite. I think that, but I think I know what you mean. I think they can continually be reinvented to be timely. I think that, you know, here in the UK and maybe in North America and Australia, we have a little bit of bardolatry and Shakespeare worship, and we tend to really sort of be very gentle with our text, even when we're being subversive with them, slightly subversive. Whereas I think it's much more iconoclastic in some other theatre cultures. People are much happier to just tear these texts apart and do what they like with them. So yeah, so I think not timeless, but can be reconfigured to be timely. That's my answer.
That's a brilliant answer, thank you. And I just want to note that I love that you just critiqued idolatry whilst wearing a Hamlet t-shirt. So
yes,
respect.
But it is from the Godin Shakespeare Theatre.
I mean, if it's from Gdansk, then we're good. Okay, I want to say a huge thank you to Saffron for such an inspiring and genuinely thought-provoking and fascinating piece of work. I'm really excited to read your book, which hopefully is going to be coming out soon. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us online and indeed here in person. Thank you for coming out and supporting this event. So we will end there. I will turn off the recording and say goodbye to you all. Can I just ask if you are here in person and if, like me, you blatantly ignored the posters saying don't bring a glass into this lecture room, if you could just return it to next door, that would be very much appreciated. But let's finish by giving Saffron another huge round of applause for that fantastic lecture. Thank you, Saffron.